Hi there. My name is Zimmerman. I'm the rector of St. Albans Episcopal Church in Waco, Texas, and I am delighted to be here with you, people of St. Michael's. Thanks to the Reverend John Newton, a good friend and a gifted minister and preacher, for inviting me to be part of this series, God, Grace, and Hope in a Pandemic, which a year ago we would have never thought pandemic would be a word in the title of our Lenten series this year, but here we are. So thank you for taking time out to watch this, to be part of this. Lord knows there could be any number of things you could be binging right now, and yet here you are watching a Lenten series. Because probably you need some God, some grace, some hope in this time of pandemic. It's been now a year that we've been in this practically, and we all want it to be over. There's a lot going on. We're not quite out of the woods yet. It's getting better, but there's still all these questions, uncertainties, difficulties, and the lingering effects. The children who have lost a school year, the marriages that have been troubled by this time, your own mental bandwidth. A lot of people I talk to are dealing with lots of mental health issues, or just they're forgetting things all the time, or just exhausted all the time. We have just been dealing with a lot, and a lot of loss, and there's grief that comes with loss. All the plans that you had for 2020, all these things, job loss, loss of loved ones, funerals you haven't been able to attend. I mean, there are people who have, they would need to use more than one hand to count the number of funerals they have not been able to attend over the past year of loved ones who have died, either from the pandemic or something else, but they haven't been able to grieve properly. So there's loss on top of loss. So I get it. There's all that going on. And so we need a little hope. So kudos to you, John Newton, for wanting to give people a little God, a little grace, a little hope in this time of pandemic. So I want to talk about that tonight. And I want to talk about three things that I, as a Christian, where I get my hope in a time like this. The first thing I'm going to talk about is history. The second thing I'm going to talk about is Jesus and his ministry as a healer. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is the gospel. What is the message of Christianity, and why does that give us hope in a time like this? So the first thing I want to talk about is history. So I'm a history major. It's my undergraduate degree, a niche little thing called history of science, but don't worry about that. I am just someone who has always been drawn to, interested in history, which makes me a great Christian, because if you've ever read the Bible, well, I don't know if I'm a great Christian, but there are things in Christianity and in our text that I love a lot because I'm into history. And this is something that gives me hope at a time of pandemic. Now, where is history in the Bible? All over the place. If you've ever gotten to those boring genealogies where they're going through so-and-so begat so-and-so, who then begat so-and-so, all that stuff, not to mention the books that are called the historical books of the Bible, to the fact that in one of the gospel books in the New Testament, St. Luke says he's sat down to write an accurate account. He's interviewed eyewitnesses, he's gathered his notes, he's done his research. So there's all this history in the text. Because apparently God, in his inspiration of the scriptures for us, thought that it would be good for us to know our own history. And if you do know your history, it gives us help and hope in a time of pandemic. So what I want to do for you first is give you a little tour of St. Albans. I hope one day you can give me a tour of St. Michael's. But I want to show to you how deeply Christians are enmeshed in our history. Just in this one parish church, in this one diocese, in this one branch of the Anglican movement, the Episcopal Church, and some of the history that jumps out at you as you just walk around our campus. Right now I'm in the parish hall. This is our newest structure on campus, just had its opening last year, right before we had to shut down for the pandemic. So that's why I'm the only one in this space. But let's go back in time a little bit. St. Albans was founded in 1946, and now I'm going to take you around our church building, and we're going to talk about history as a Christian. So join me on the tour. We're walking, we're walking, we're walking, we're walking. This is St. Albans. This building was built in 1951, but it was designed to look like an old English church, and they used Texas limestone to do it. We have a palm tree outside of our sacristy, because in the 80s, a family moved here from Arizona, and they brought a little pizza home with them. And now we have this palm tree outside of our neo-Gothic church. Right here in our sacristy, we have behind me a window that shows the seal of the Episcopal Diocese of Texas. You see that longhorn at the bottom showing the roots of one of the main industries in our state. You'll see two dates on that, 1836, which references the founding of Christ Church Matagorda, the first missionary effort of the Episcopal Church into what was then the Republic of Texas. And below that, the date 1849, when the Diocese was created out of Christ Church Cathedral in Houston, Texas. On our doors, we have the shield of St. Albans, an English saint, the first martyr in England, who died in the 300s for his faith. Over here on this other door, we have the shield of the Episcopal Church. These 9 crosses represent the 9 original dioceses that started the Episcopal Church. This guy behind me is St. Francis of Assisi. He lived in the 1100s in Italy. He's this romantic figure because he gave up a life of riches and gave up everything he had, went to serve the poor, and he loved animals, and we love animals, so we think he's great, so we get our animals blessed, and he's rooted in history. Behind me, you can see 2 of our stained glass windows. We have a lot more. They're in the church, and on the other side, they're getting restored and renovated. So these windows were designed by Ernst Janssen Wilhelm, a German artist in the middle of the 20th century. And these beautiful windows he designed for us. That was his family business. But before he designed windows, he had to take a break because he was conscripted and he fought for the wrong side. He fought for the Germans in World War II, and after the war ended, went back to his window designing. We Christians even have our personal histories. This is a carving at St. Albans on our organ case that shows King David there, shirtless, dancing as the Ark of the Covenant is carried into Jerusalem. He's dancing with great might, the scriptures tell us, so much so that his loincloth flapped in the breeze, giving great displeasure to his wife, Michael, M-I-C-H-A-L, up there in the window, looking down disapprovingly on her husband's dance moves. So not only do we have our communal history, we have our personal history. And here we have some of David's marital history and family dysfunction on display. We all have our history. Behind me is the altar at St. Albans, and you can see on it a cross, which is a Roman-invented execution device. And then next to it you see the Chi Rho, a symbol for the name of Christ. A Greek letter chi that looks like an X, and a Greek letter rho, which looks like a P. Those written out in English letters would be C-H-R. Again, for us, the first 3 letters of the name of Christ. But the fact that it's written in Greek letters is a reference to the history of Christianity. That when people began writing down the events of Jesus' life, they did so in the most common and widely spoken language of the time, Greek. And we're back, and I hope you enjoyed seeing some of those examples of our history as Episcopalians, as Texans, as Christians, in that little tour, again, in this one little corner of Christendom. But the thing that I want to say about history and why it gives me hope, especially now in this time of pandemic, and not to mention the other crises that have been going on, the election and the economic upheaval, all that is scary and difficult. But the thing about being a Christian and knowing your history, what you can draw on is the fact that we have been here before. Christianity in our history was born in an incredibly difficult time, in conditions that were similar and sometimes worse than what we are going through now. As you know, Christianity was born in the 1st century in the Roman Empire. Jesus' people, the Jewish community, knew great economic deprivation. The Roman government was well known for high taxes, which is one of the reasons why those tax collectors in the New Testament were hated all the time. High taxes, you would get so in debt trying to pay those taxes, the Roman government would repossess your land, which was often the collateral that you used to borrow money to pay those taxes. And then they would mash all these different farms that were taken from ancestral lands that had been in the family for centuries and create one big state-owned farm, because one of the things that little boot of Italy needed out there in the Mediterranean Sea was lots and lots of food to keep that standing army going, to keep the Romans well-fed. And so that was kind of the point of the empire. It was built on the backs of people who didn't have much, and Jesus was one of those people. So, economic hard times, we have been there before. And when you think about political strife, we have been there before. Christianity has seen so many empires, kings, rulers, nation states, principalities come and go through the years. England became Christian first when it was still part of the Roman Empire. St. Albans, the patron saint of this church, was the first martyr. He was a Roman soldier who converted to Christianity and lost life because of his faith. And his blood was, as they say, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So the shrine grew up, a church grew up, an abbey grew up around the site of his martyrdom, and of course Christianity spread throughout the British Isles. And then the Vikings almost wiped it out. And then it came back. And then, the Reformation, and it was Catholic, it was Protestant, it was Catholic, it was Protestant, it was, and then it was Puritan for a while, and Cromwell got a little out of control. And then we had this monarchy, and now the monarchy is there, and the Queen of England is the governor of the Church of England, but doesn't really control things. There's a prime minister. All that to say, you know this, you've watched The Crown. All that to say is we've been through a lot as Christians. We've been through a lot economically. We've been through a lot politically. And we've been through pandemics. We've been through plagues. They were common in the ancient world. One of the things that Christians first did, one of their first ministries in the cities of the ancient world where Christian churches grew up, was to take care of the sick. Hospitals didn't really exist as a thing until Christians started them. And this is the thing. When you know your history as a Christian, you know that you're part of a great, long tradition of people who cling to God and cling to each other in historically difficult times. This is not our first rodeo, brothers and sisters. So knowing our history, knowing the environment in which our faith grew and thrived, gives me hope in this time, because we wouldn't be here if we hadn't gotten through those earlier times. There's a thing that they say on Peloton. Peloton is this at-home stationary bike exercise thing. The stock is going way up because everybody's working out at home now. And one of the things one of the instructors says, because they're kind of like inspirational life coaches, much like John Newton, and one of the things they say is, you've made it through, if you're watching this right now, you've made it through 100% of your bad days. You have made it through 100% of your bad days. You're still here. And the Christian church, the fact that St. Michael's Austin exists means that the Christian church has made it through 100% of its bad days. From the very beginning, people tried to stamp out Christianity. Persecution after persecution. And yet here we are. So knowing our history gives me hope in this time. We have been here before, we're in it now, and we will go through it again. And yet God is faithful, and as the author of the letter to the Hebrews says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So that's point one. I have hope because I know our history. The second thing that gives me hope in this time of pandemic is how important healing is to Jesus. We think of him as the person who died and rose for us, accurate. We think of him as a great teacher, totally true. But one of the things he was doing all the time was healing people. It was one of his major ministries. It would say he would go forth into all the towns and villages, teaching, healing, and driving out demons. So exorcism as well, which is for another talk and another day. But healing was a big part of Jesus' ministry, and it gives me such hope in this time. And I'll show you, there's one story I want to read to you from Luke chapter 13. And it says, "Now Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. And behold, there was a woman who had a disabling spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not fully straighten herself. When Jesus saw her, he called her over and said to her, 'Woman, you are freed from your disability.' And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and she glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue, indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said to the people, 'There are 6 days in which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day.' Then the Lord answered him, 'You hypocrites, does not each of you on the Sabbath untie his ox or his donkey from the manger and lead it away to water it? And ought not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath day. Here endeth the lesson. That is Luke 13, verses 10 through 16. And I love the story because it shows how much Jesus cares about healing, how much he cares for people who are sick. And again, in this pandemic, it gives me great hope to know that one of Jesus' priorities in his ministry was healing. Because as I just said before in the first section, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Now, the means that he makes use of for the cure of people and societies may be different, but he's just as interested in healing today as he was in his earthly ministry. And this story is great because Jesus is going to a place where you're not supposed to heal, taking someone that you're not supposed to heal, and healing them. And he wants to do it in a way to create the maximum amount of trouble and scandal, because that's when people are to remember it and take notice. And it enables Jesus to further continue his ministry. Because he's in the synagogue on the Sabbath. And of course, the rule for the Sabbath was no work. Very important. One of the 10 Commandments. Chick-fil-A knows this very well. And the rabbinic community had written lots of books, spilled lots of inks, done lots of teaching on what actually constituted work. How far can you walk to work? And what chores around the house are you able to do? What if your livestock falls in a pit? Can you bring it out on the Sabbath? What are you allowed to do? This was a really important thing. And one of the things you were not allowed to do was to heal on the Sabbath. So Jesus goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath day. There he is, knowing full well, good Jewish boy that he was not supposed to heal on the Sabbath. And he sees a woman who's bent over. Now, I love it because Luke is a doctor, Luke the physician, St. Luke. So he always gives us a little bit of the patient's chart. And he gives a description of the symptoms. This woman had some sort of scoliosis, osteoporosis, where she was bent over. She was kind of hunched over. So much so that she was not able to stand up, which would have meant she wouldn't have been able to pick up her grandchildren or to help around her family's home or any of those things. And probably was very painful, was also publicly humiliating. And she had been this way for 18 years. If you know anyone with chronic, long-standing pain or debilitating conditions, you know how awful and difficult this can be. And Jesus sees her in the synagogue, knows he's not supposed to heal her. She doesn't ask for healing, but he does it anyway. He takes the initiative. He sees her need. It says he calls her over. And in the synagogue, the men sat on one side, the women sat on the other. Calls her over and says to her, without her asking, without her saying, I have enough faith, I'll make this happen. You know, sometimes people say you got to have enough faith in order to get healed. This woman says nothing. He just sees her, calls her over, and says, woman, you are freed from your disability. This is the empowering word of Jesus Christ. What he says happens. Just like in Genesis 1, the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light. Same thing here, same creative power. Woman, you are freed from your disability. And then it says he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight. Again, always, we know healing is important to Jesus, not only because he sees this woman, takes the initiative to heal her through his verbal command, but also shows compassion, that pastoral touch. Phil Collins sang, she seems to have an invisible touch. That was when he was in Genesis after the Peter Gabriel years. Anyways, Jesus' touch is not invisible. He wants everybody to see. He cares, he knows, and he reaches out to touch her and heals her. And this is who Jesus is. And again, the people around, the religious folks, personified here by the ruler of the synagogue, the senior pastor, the rector, stands up and says, hey, no healing on the Sabbath. There's 6 days to heal, not now. He misses the forest for the trees. We human beings tend to think more about the rules and did he follow policies and procedures and all that sort of stuff. And Jesus cares more about the people. And so he heals this woman. And he points out that you untie your ox and your donkey from the manger to lead them to get some water on the Sabbath. That's allowed. How crazy is it that we say we can't heal somebody on the Sabbath? Jesus cares about healing. It was a centerpiece of his ministry. He takes the initiative to do it, even for someone who's not expecting it, and doesn't pray the perfect prayer or indicate any real faith that we can see in the text. Jesus cares about healing, and knowing that gives me hope in a time of pandemic. Part 3 for why I have hope in the midst of a pandemic. And it's the gospel. The gospel of Jesus Christ, put quite simply, is the one-way love of God for sinful people. Meaning, it's one way in that unbidden, that means unasked for, and unearned, it comes to us. God reaches out and loves us when we are unlovable, when we're running away, when we're not even looking for love, or as the song says, looking for love in all the wrong places. This is the gospel. The message of the gospel is not, good people, you need to get better. The message of the gospel is, while you were dead in your sins, Christ died for you. And what that says is human beings can't get better on their own. A dead person cannot raise him or herself. We often think that we human beings, there's some things that maybe are suboptimal in our lives, but they just need a few tweaks, some life hacks, some pro tips, some life coaching, and we will turn into the people we're meant to be. But I bet if you are in your 30s, you're still struggling on some level with the things that you were struggling with when you were 17. If you're in your 50s, you're struggling with some of the same difficult personality traits that you had in your 20s. If you're in your 70s, it's amazing if you get somebody in their 70s to talk honestly about what is going on in their inner life. There are things they still can't get over, and they've been dealing with them forever. Now, this is not to depress you. What I'm trying to do is encourage you to say that the good news is the gospel means that God looks at you and loves you when you're 15, when you're 55, and when you're 85, and the whole time in between. And Jesus Christ is called the friend of sinners. Another way to say that would be, he's someone who loves human beings. And this pandemic, like any stress or crisis, pushes on human beings. It pushes on us, it stresses us out, it strains us, it removes our normal coping mechanisms, it takes away the things that used to numb our situation. We are forced to live in our house with the people that we used to be able to get away from, and when we went to work or whatever. Your children are stressed more than they used to be because of the home learning or the hybrid learning or whatever is going on. Just all these things press on us, and when people get pressed, they get angry, they get anxious, and sin comes out in new ways. The wars, the horrible things people say to each other online about their political views, about whether they mask or don't mask, and all the ways we find to be terrible to each other. What the pandemic has revealed is the pandemic is another way for us to find new ways to be terrible to each other. And they're actually not that new. The same arguments we're having about masks, people had about seatbelts 50, 60 years ago. If you go back to writings that were done in the bubonic plague times, the same debates that we've had this past year about if you wear a mask, you're showing fear and not faith. That whole thing, that happened during the bubonic plague in Europe, 500, 600, 700 years ago. Human beings are really good at taking any situation and using it to demonstrate their own sinfulness. Of course, we saw this in an election season, and this happens every year. This is not a partisan statement. Every party has a way of accusing the other party of doing a bad thing, where when your party does it, you let them off the hook. And that's just a bigger version of we do personally in our lives all the time. How many times has somebody cut you off driving or made a turn without a signal, and you let them know how you feel about it? Now, they can't hear you, but you have some deep sense that your psychic energy is transferring from your vehicle to theirs, and they know deep down what a horrible person they are. Now, when you have cut somebody off or forgotten to turn on your signal, you are quick to find ways to justify it. That you had a bad day. There's reasons, there's mitigating circumstances. There's a reason why you forgot to turn on your blinker, or there's a reason why you didn't realize you had to make that lane change at the last minute, and you're really apologetic. We let ourselves off the hook for things that we do not forgive in others. And the pandemic, again, is just another one of those things that has demonstrated the self-absorption, the blind spots, the human tendency to take any situation and kind of make it about our ego, to sin. And so the reason I have hope in the midst of a pandemic is I know that the Lord sees human beings like sheep without a shepherd, harassed and helpless, and has compassion on them. Over and over, Jesus sees his own disciples fail and stumble, denying Christ, betraying him, and he always offers forgiveness. This is the God who, when Peter asked Jesus, "How many times should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me?" Maybe 7 times. Peter feels really generous when he says that. And Jesus says, no, 70 times 7. In essence, saying unlimited, get out of jail free cards. This is the grace of God. And that gives me hope in a time of pandemic, because there's no doubt that we human beings haven't yet found a situation that we cannot make worse. And yet we have a God whose forgiveness knows no bounds. So I have grace, I have hope, I have God, and so do you in this time of pandemic. Behind me is this drive-up entrance to the Welcome Center at St Albans. And when we built this whole project, we were really excited about the spaces that I'm standing in, the Welcome Center that's behind me, the parish hall I was just in. But it turns out that the most important thing that we were building was the parking lot, because that turns out that that's what we needed in a time of pandemic. It's turned into our primary worship space these days, and because we now have lighting in it, and because we have actually now parking lines that you can see through this physical, incarnational reality stuff, we now have a place to worship in this difficult and stressful time. And God is a God who knows what we need, even when we don't know what we need. God is a God who provides for us. Our history shows it, reminds us that we've been here before, and we've made it to today, and we'll get through this just as we have in the past. We also know that our God is a God who loves to heal, meaning to take physically broken things and put them back together. Took a broken, busted old parking lot and turned it into a worship space. And we know that our God is one who has grace. He forgives and embraces and loves sinners. So wherever you are, whether you're hearing this in a parking lot, whether you're hearing this in your living room, or you're watching this on your phone, on your lunch break, I don't know, that message is for you. You have God, you have grace, and you have hope, even in the midst of this pandemic, maybe especially in the midst of this pandemic. May God bless you and keep you. And I look forward to continuing this series as John and I jump into a podcast and talk more about these themes. Talk to you soon. Thanks.